March 17th, 2019. Joel Osteen stands before a crowd of 52,000 people at Lakewood Church in Houston, Texas. The former basketball arena pulses with energy. Giant screens beam his smile to every corner. The worship band's production value rivals a Taylor Swift concert. This is the megachurch at its absolute zenith, the American religious empire in full bloom. But there's something Joel doesn't know yet. In exactly 18 months, something will happen that will shake the foundation of everything he's built. Not a scandal, not a theological crisis. Something far more terrifying for the megachurch model. People will simply stop coming, and they won't come back. The parking lots that once required traffic directors now echo with emptiness. The coffee bars that served thousands now operate at half capacity. The bookstores, the gift shops, the childcare centers built for armies of children now feel cavernous and hollow. This isn't just about one church. Across America, the megachurch bubble is bursting, and the sound is deafening in its silence. To understand why this is happening, we need to go back to where it all began. Because the megachurch wasn't always the face of American Christianity. 50 years ago, it barely existed. The story of its rise is the story of American ambition, marketing genius, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what people were actually searching for. Robert Schuller stands in an Orange County drive-in movie theater in 1955. He's conducting a church service from the roof of the snack bar. Cars are lined up, families sitting inside them, listening to his sermon through speakers hung on their windows. It's bizarre, it's revolutionary, it's quintessentially American. Schuller understands something that traditional churches don't. Americans want convenience. They want comfort. They want church without the stuffiness, without the guilt, without having to dress up and sit on hard wooden pews. Within 2 decades, Schuller's Crystal Cathedral becomes a glass monument to this new vision. 10,000 windows, nearly 3,000 seats. Services broadcast on television to millions. The theology is simple, optimistic, digestible. Possibility thinking, Schuller calls it. God wants you to succeed. God wants you to be happy. God wants you to dream big. This isn't fire and brimstone. This is prosperity gospel wrapped in psychological affirmation, and Americans are hungry for it. Bill Hybels is watching. Rick Warren is watching. Joel Osteen is watching. They see what Schuller has done, and they're going to take it further. Much further. The 1980s and 90s become the golden age of megachurch construction. Willow Creek Community Church opens outside Chicago with a deliberate strategy. Make church feel like anything but church. No crosses, no religious symbols. Instead, it looks like a corporate campus. There are theaters, food courts, bookstores. The services feature dramatic sketches, contemporary music, and messages focused on practical living rather than theological doctrine. Hybels calls it seeker-sensitive. Critics call it Christianity light. But the numbers don't lie. By 1992, Willow Creek is drawing 15,000 people every weekend. Rick Warren launches Saddleback Church in Southern California in 1980, and he's even more systematic in his approach. He studies demographics. He surveys the unchurched. He asks them why they don't go to church, and then he designs a church that eliminates every objection they have. Don't like organ music? We'll have rock bands. Don't like ties and suits? Come in shorts. Don't like long sermons? We'll keep it to 25 minutes. Don't like being asked for money? We won't pass a plate. It works spectacularly. Saddleback grows to 20,000 members. Warren writes The Purpose-Driven Life, which sells 32 million copies and makes him one of the most influential religious figures in America. He's on talk shows. He's advising presidents. He gives the invocation at Barack Obama's 2009 inauguration. The megachurch pastor has become a celebrity, a brand, a franchise. And then there's Joel Osteen. In 1999, his father, John Osteen, dies, and Joel reluctantly takes over Lakewood Church in Houston. Joel has never preached a sermon in his life. He's been working behind the scenes in television production. But he understands media, he understands messaging, he understands that in America, presentation often matters more than substance. Joel's first sermon is awkward, nervous, but he learns fast. He drops the theological complexity. He abandons talk of sin and judgment. Instead, every sermon becomes a motivational speech with Bible verses sprinkled in. You're going to have a good year. Favor is coming your way. God has something better in store for you. It's Oprah meets prosperity gospel. It's self-help Christianity, and it explodes. By 2003, Lakewood outgrows its building. Osteen sets his sights on something audacious: the Compaq Center, the former home of the Houston Rockets. The renovation cost over $105 million. When it opens in 2005, it's the largest church in America. 16,000 seats, 2 massive video screens, a worship experience that feels more like a concert than a church service. Joel's sermons are broadcast to over 100 countries. His books become bestsellers. He moves into a $10 million mansion in River Oaks, one of Houston's most exclusive neighborhoods. The megachurch model seems unstoppable. By 2010, there are roughly 1,600 megachurches in America, defined as Protestant churches with at least 2,000 weekly attendees. Together, they're drawing millions of people and generating billions of dollars in revenue. Some are building water parks, some have laser tag arenas, some offer rock climbing walls, bowling alleys, and full-service restaurants. The line between church and entertainment complex has completely dissolved. But beneath the surface, something is shifting. In 2007, Bill Hybels does something remarkable. After decades of growth, after becoming the model for thousands of churches worldwide, he commissions a study. He wants to know if Willow Creek is actually working. Is it producing mature, committed Christians? Is it creating deep faith or just drawing crowds? The results are devastating. The study, called Reveal, discovers that increased participation in church activities doesn't necessarily correlate with spiritual growth. In fact, many of the most active members report feeling spiritually stagnant. They've been attending services, volunteering, attending small groups, but they don't feel closer to God. They feel like consumers of religious products rather than transformed disciples. Hybels is shaken. In a moment of brutal honesty, he admits, "We made a mistake. What we should have done when people cross the line of faith and become Christians, we should have started telling people and teaching people that they have to take responsibility to become self-feeders. We should have gotten people, taught them how to read their Bible between services, how to do spiritual practices much more aggressively on their own." The confession is extraordinary. The godfather of the seeker-sensitive movement is admitting that the model might be fundamentally flawed. But the machine is too big to stop. The megachurches keep growing. The buildings keep getting bigger. The budgets keep expanding. Then 2020 arrives. Where are you watching this from right now, and what time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you're someone who's worked in church leadership, or if you've watched these changes firsthand, I'd love to hear your perspective. March 15th, 2020. Churches across America close their doors. Not by choice. Not as a theological statement. Because of a pandemic. For the first time in generations, millions of Americans can't attend their megachurches. The parking lot's empty, the coffee bars close, the childcare centers shut down. Everything that made the megachurch experience appealing disappears overnight. But here's what church leaders expected to happen. They expected people to desperately wait for reopening. They expected pent-up demand. They expected a triumphant return when doors could finally open again. They built elaborate online streaming services. They created virtual small groups. They assured themselves this was temporary. What actually happened was far more devastating. People discovered they didn't miss it. Not the way they thought they would. Not enough to come back. When churches began reopening in late 2020 and throughout 2021, the attendance numbers were catastrophic. Megachurches that had drawn 10,000 people were getting 4,000. Churches with 5,000 attendees were down to 2,000. And here's the crucial part. the decline didn't stop. As months passed and COVID restrictions lifted, the numbers didn't rebound. They kept falling. By 2023, the data painted a devastating picture. Research from the Hartford Institute for Religion Research showed that megachurch attendance had dropped by an average of 30 to 40% from pre-pandemic levels. But the real crisis wasn't just in attendance. It was in who was leaving. It wasn't the casual attendees, the Christmas and Easter crowd. It was the committed members, the volunteers, the tithers, the people who made the entire operation possible. Saddleback Church, Rick Warren's flagship, faced a crisis. Warren had retired in 2021, and the church was struggling with succession. But beyond that, weekly attendance had plummeted. The church that once drew 30,000 people was drawing 15,000. Staff had to be cut. Programs were eliminated. The church that wrote the manual on church growth was now managing decline. Lakewood Church, despite Joel Osteen's continued television presence, saw its in-person attendance drop dramatically. The 16,000-seat auditorium that used to require multiple services now had entire sections roped off. The energy that came from a packed room, the emotional momentum that made Joel's messages feel electric, was gone. Watching Joel preach to a half-empty arena revealed something uncomfortable. So much of the appeal had been the crowd, not the message. Willow Creek faced an even more dramatic collapse, though for different reasons. In 2018, right before the pandemic, Bill Hybels resigned amid multiple allegations of sexual misconduct. He denied the allegations, but the damage was catastrophic. The church that had pioneered the seeker-sensitive movement was now pioneering something else: how a megachurch implodes. Attendance dropped from 25,000 to around 7,000. Staff fled, satellite campuses closed. The Willow Creek Association, which had provided resources to thousands of churches worldwide, dissolved. But the Willow Creek story revealed something deeper than scandal. It revealed how dependent the megachurch model is on a single charismatic leader. When that leader falls or leaves, the whole enterprise can collapse, because people weren't coming for a community or a theology. They were coming for a personality. Mars Hill Church in Seattle provided an even more dramatic example. Mark Driscoll had built one of the fastest-growing megachurches in America, drawing 15,000 people across multiple campuses. His sermons were edgy, controversial, and massively popular with young men. But in 2014, allegations emerged of abusive leadership, plagiarism, and manipulation of book sales to get on bestseller lists. Driscoll resigned. Within months, Mars Hill Church completely dissolved. All 15 campuses closed. 15,000 attendees scattered. A religious empire vanished almost overnight. The question started being asked more loudly: were these churches, or were they personality cults with Christian branding? The pandemic didn't create these problems, it exposed them. It forced people to step back and ask hard questions. Questions they'd been too busy to ask when they were caught up in the momentum of weekend services, volunteer commitments, and church activities. Jennifer Martinez sits in her Denver apartment in November 2020. She's been a member of a large megachurch for 8 years. Before the pandemic, she was there every Sunday, sometimes twice. She volunteered in the children's ministry. She attended a small group. She gave generously. But now, watching the service on her laptop, something feels different. The production is still slick. The message is still positive. But divorced from the experience of the crowd, from the lights and the music and the energy, she realizes something unsettling. She's not learning anything. She hasn't learned anything in years. The sermons are the same. The messages are interchangeable. God has a plan for your life. Better days are ahead. Don't give up on your dreams. Fun. She starts reading books on theology. She starts listening to podcasts that ask difficult questions. She starts attending a small liturgical church in her neighborhood where the pastor wears robes and the congregation is 60 people, and they read ancient prayers and take communion every week. And she realizes what she'd been missing: depth, substance, theological weight. Community that's not organized around programs but around genuine relationship. Jennifer's story is being repeated millions of times across America. The pandemic created space for people to realize that the megachurch experience, for all its excitement, had often been spiritually shallow. The numbers are staggering. A 2023 study by Lifeway Research found that 40% of Americans who attended church regularly before the pandemic were now attending less frequently or not at all. Among younger adults, the numbers were even worse. Among those aged 18 to 29, the decline was nearly 60%. But the crisis goes beyond attendance. It's financial. Megachurches are built on a model that requires massive ongoing revenue. The mortgages on $100 million buildings, the salaries for dozens or hundreds of staff members, the production costs for broadcast quality services, the maintenance of sprawling campuses. All of this requires a constant flow of money from a constant flow of people. When attendance drops by 30 to 40%, the financial model collapses. Churches that had been expanding are now selling off buildings. Churches that had multiple campuses are consolidating. Staffs are being cut by 40, 50, sometimes 60%. Gateway Church in Texas, one of the largest megachurches in America with 100,000 members across multiple campuses, faced a devastating scandal in 2024. Its founder, Robert Morris, was forced to resign after allegations emerged that he had sexually abused a 12-year-old girl in the 1980s. The church had known about the incident, but allowed Morris to remain in leadership. Attendance collapsed. Donations plummeted. The church that had been a model of growth was now fighting for survival. Hillsong Church, the Australian megachurch that became a global phenomenon largely through its music, has seen its American operations crumble. At its peak, Hillsong had locations in major U.S. cities and influenced worship music in churches worldwide. But scandals involving founder Brian Houston, combined with reports of abusive leadership and financial impropriety, led to mass exodus. The New York City campus, once the crown jewel of Hillsong's American expansion, closed in 2022. Other campuses followed. The global organization that had seemed unstoppable is now in freefall. What becomes clear is that the megachurch model created perverse incentives. Growth became the measure of success. Numbers became the metric of God's blessing. This created pressure to keep people happy, to avoid controversial topics, to make sure the experience was always upbeat and entertaining. Pastors became performers, services became shows, and difficult biblical teachings that might offend people or make them uncomfortable were quietly set aside. The prosperity gospel, which had been a feature of many megachurches, became especially problematic. The message that God wants you to be wealthy, healthy, and successful is appealing, but it falls apart when you're not wealthy, when you get sick, when you face suffering. COVID brought suffering, it brought death, it brought economic hardship, and suddenly the prosperity message rang hollow. People started asking, where was this theology when my grandmother died alone in a hospital? Where was it when I lost my job? Where was it when I was terrified and anxious and the world felt like it was falling apart? And the answer was, it had nothing to offer. Because it was never a robust theology. It was a marketing message. If you found this deep dive valuable, consider supporting the channel with a super thanks. It genuinely helps us continue making these kinds of detailed documentaries. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. We're Professor Archive, and we dig deep into the stories that shape our world. But the crisis of the megachurch isn't just about theology, it's about technology, because the very tools that helped megachurches grow are now contributing to their decline. In the 1980s and 90s, megachurches had a technological advantage. They could broadcast services on TV and radio. They could produce professional quality music and videos. They could create an experience that small churches couldn't match. If you wanted high-quality Christian content, you went to a megachurch or you watched one on TV. But now you can access the best preachers, the best worship music, the best theological teaching from your phone. You can watch Tim Keller's sermons from New York. You can listen to N.T. Wright's lectures. You can access Bible studies from scholars around the world. You don't need to drive to a megachurch for quality Christian content. In fact, the content available online is often better because it's not limited by the need to keep things simple and non-offensive to maintain crowds. The democratization of Christian content has eliminated one of the megachurch's key advantages. And once you remove that advantage, what's left? Often, not much. There's also a cultural shift happening. The megachurch model was built for a particular moment in American culture, the suburban expansion of the late 20th century. It assumed nuclear families with cars who lived in suburban communities and were looking for a church that fit their lifestyle. It assumed people wanted large, impersonal gatherings where they could remain anonymous if they chose. But younger generations are different. They're more urban. They're skeptical of institutions. They're allergic to anything that feels like marketing or manipulation. They want authenticity over production value. They want community over crowds. They want churches that are engaged in social justice, that wrestle with difficult questions, that acknowledge doubt and struggle rather than papering over it with positive thinking. The megachurch model wasn't built for these values, it was built for the opposite. There's also the political dimension. Many megachurches became closely associated with conservative politics. During the Trump era, this association became explicit. Prominent megachurch pastors appeared at political rallies, endorsed candidates, and framed Christianity in partisan terms. This might have energized some people, but it alienated many others. Research from the Public Religion Research Institute found that one of the fastest growing religious categories in America is the no-nays, people who claim no religious affiliation. This category has grown from 16% of Americans in 2007 to 26% in 2023. When asked why they left organized religion, many cite the church's involvement in politics, its hypocrisy, and its treatment of LGBTQ individuals. The megachurch, which had tried to be seeker-sensitive and avoid offense, increasingly became associated with a particular political and cultural stance. This narrowed its appeal precisely when it needed to be broadening it. So what's happening now? What does the landscape look like as the bubble bursts? Some megachurches are adapting. They're becoming smaller, more intentional. They're cutting back on production and focusing on community. They're selling off their massive buildings and moving to more modest facilities. They're acknowledging that bigger isn't always better. Christ Church in Nashville sold its sprawling campus and moved to a historic church building downtown. Attendance is smaller, but engagement is deeper. The budget is a fraction of what it was, but the church is financially stable. The pastor, Sam Davis, explained the shift. We realized we had built something that required constant growth to sustain itself. That's not a church, that's a Ponzi scheme. Other megachurches are doubling down. They're investing even more in production, streaming, and digital presence. They're trying to become media companies that happen to have physical locations. The bet is that if they can build a large enough online audience, they can sustain the operation even if in-person attendance continues to decline. But many megachurches are simply dying. The buildings are being sold, sometimes to other churches, sometimes to developers who turn them into entertainment venues, shopping centers, or office complexes. The Crystal Cathedral, Robert Schuller's glass monument, was sold to the Catholic Church in 2012 after Schuller's ministry went bankrupt. It's now called Christ Cathedral. The irony is thick. The church that pioneered the megachurch model couldn't sustain itself. What's emerging in the wreckage is diverse. House churches, small liturgical communities, online faith communities, churches that meet in bars and coffee shops. Some people are leaving Christianity altogether. Others are finding expressions of faith that look nothing like what they left. There's grief in this process. For many people, their megachurch was where they found faith, where they got married, where their children were dedicated. The closing or decline of these churches represents the loss of something significant. But there's also liberation. Liberation from the pressure to perform, to volunteer, to give endlessly. Liberation from theology that was shallow and manipulative. Liberation from the feeling that faith was primarily about being part of a crowd. Marcus Thompson grew up at a megachurch in Atlanta. He's 32 now, and he hasn't attended a church service in 3 years. I don't think I've lost my faith, he says. I think I lost my faith in that model of faith. I'm reading theology now. I'm praying. I'm trying to live out what Jesus actually taught about caring for the poor and loving your neighbor. But I'm doing it outside the institution that told me that success meant a big building and a charismatic pastor and an emotional worship experience. Maybe the bubble bursting is the best thing that could have happened. The question that haunts the megachurch pastors who remain is whether they built something sustainable or just a house of cards. Joel Osteen still preaches to thousands. His television audience remains large. But he's 61 now. What happens when he retires or dies? Will Lakewood survive, or will it follow the pattern of Mars Hill and dissolve? Rick Warren's Saddleback Church is discovering the answer to that question in real time. Warren's successor, Andy Wood, is facing challenges Warren never had to deal with: declining attendance, financial pressure, theological controversy over the role of women in ministry that led to Saddleback being expelled from the Southern Baptist Convention. The church that was the model of success is now the model of succession crisis. The reality is stark. The megachurch bubble was built on unsustainable premises. It assumed endless growth. It assumed that making church more like entertainment would create lasting faith. It assumed that Americans' spiritual hunger could be satisfied with positive messages and emotional experiences. All of these assumptions are proving false. The sociologist James Davison Hunter wrote that American evangelicalism became thinly committed and weakly mobilized because it had accepted the logic of consumerism. People treated church like any other service. If it met their needs, they stayed. If it didn't, they left. The megachurch accelerated this logic by explicitly designing itself around consumer preferences. But consumer loyalty is fickle, and when better options appear or when the need changes, consumers move on. What's emerging in the aftermath is unclear. Christianity in America is fragmenting. Some predict a return to smaller, more traditional forms of church. Others predict continued decline, especially among younger generations. Still others believe something entirely new is being born, forms of faith and community we can't yet fully see. But one thing is certain: the era of the megachurch as the dominant expression of American Christianity is ending. The buildings will still be there, at least for a while. Some will continue to draw crowds, though smaller ones. But the moment has passed, the bubble has burst, and Sunday morning in America will never look quite the same. The parking lots are quieter now. The coffee bars serve fewer lattes. The bookstores have smaller inventories. The children's areas aren't quite as full. And on Sunday mornings across America, in those massive auditoriums built for thousands, there are empty seats. Lots of them. The cameras don't show them, but they're there. A monument to a particular moment in American religious history. A moment that's now passing into memory. The question isn't whether the megachurch era is ending. It's what comes next. And that story is still being written in small churches and house gatherings, in online communities and coffee shop conversations, by people trying to figure out what authentic faith looks like when the show is over and the crowd has gone home.